Hell's Angel was still a virgin at 40 until a lonely black virgin asked to stay in his cabin during a blizzard. In the middle of the Smoky Mountains, a man once feared by everyone, an ex-Hell's Angel biker, thought he'd buried his past for good. He lives alone, miles from the nearest soul, until one frozen night. A desperate knock shatters the silence. A trembling woman in a red coat stands at his door, begging for warmth. He lets her in, but neither of them knows that one act of mercy will change everything. As the storm traps them inside, two broken hearts find something they've both been running from: faith, forgiveness, and desire they've never known. But out there in the snow, someone's coming. A man who calls himself righteous and will do anything to take her back. When love is born in the ashes of sin and shame, can redemption survive the fire? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The late autumn wind whistled through the ancient pines, their branches swaying like dark fingers against the gray mountain sky. Sam Hawk Hensley stood at his cabin window, watching the first heavy flakes of snow spiral down from angry clouds. His weathered hands gripped a steaming mug of coffee, the only warmth he allowed himself these days. Bear, his shepherd mix, lay curled near the wood stove, his gray-flecked muzzle resting on massive paws. The dog's eyes followed Sam's every move, a silent guardian who understood his master's need for quiet. Sam had just returned from his monthly supply run to town, the truck's bed loaded with enough provisions to last through what promised to be a harsh winter. The radio on his kitchen counter crackled with static, the announcer's voice cutting through with increasing urgency about an unexpected blizzard bearing down on the Smoky Mountains. "Looks like we battened down the hatches just in time, old friend," Sam muttered to Bear, his voice rough from disuse. The dog's tail thumped once against the wooden floor in response. The cabin, built by Sam's own hands over 2 long summers, creaked and groaned against the rising wind. Every board, every nail, every window frame bore the marks of his careful work. It wasn't much, just one main room with a small bedroom and bathroom off to the side. But it was his sanctuary. Stacks of furniture waiting to be repaired lined one wall, their broken pieces a reflection of his own fractured past. As darkness crept in, Sam lit the kerosene lamps, their warm glow casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The memories always came stronger at night, faces of people he'd rather forget, echoes of motorcycle engines and violence that still made him wake in cold sweats. He'd left that life behind 5 years ago, but some stains, he'd learned, never quite wash clean. The wind howled louder now, driving snow against the windows in fierce gusts. Sam added another log to the stove, watching as sparks danced up the chimney. Bear's ears suddenly perked up, his head lifting from his paws. "What is it, boy?" Sam asked, though he hadn't heard anything but the storm. Then it came. 3 faint knocks, barely audible above the wind. Sam froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Nobody came up here, especially not in weather like this. Bear stood, his tail low but not threatening, moving toward the door. The knocking came again, weaker this time. Sam's hand instinctively reached for the rifle above the fireplace, then stopped. 5 years of solitude had made him paranoid, but something in that knock spoke of desperation, not threat. He crossed to the door in 3 long strides, throwing the heavy bolt back. The wind nearly tore the door from his grasp as he pulled it open, sending a swirl of snow across the threshold. A figure stood swaying in the doorway, wrapped in a bright red coat dusted with snow. Sam caught a glimpse of dark skin, wide eyes filled with fear and exhaustion, before the woman's knees buckled. "Please," she whispered, falling forward. "I just need warmth." Sam caught her before she hit the floor, her body frighteningly cold against his arms. Bear whined softly, pressing his nose against the woman's limp hand. For a moment, Sam stood frozen, this unexpected intrusion into his carefully maintained solitude throwing him off balance. The woman was slight in his arms, her breathing shallow, her skin like ice where it touched his bare forearms. "Bear, move back," he commanded gruffly, carrying the unconscious woman to his worn leather armchair near the stove. The dog obeyed but stayed close, his eyes fixed on their unexpected guest with unusual interest. Sam gently lowered her into the chair, noticing how her red coat was soaked through with melted snow. Her face was young, maybe early 30s, with delicate features now pinched with cold. Dark curls escaped from beneath a knit hat, frosted with ice crystals. Moving quickly, Sam grabbed the thick wool blanket from his bed and wrapped it around her shoulders. Her eyelids fluttered but didn't open, her breathing still worryingly shallow. "Ma'am?" he said, his voice sounding strange in his ears after so many months of near silence. "Can you hear me?" No response. Sam ran a hand through his graying hair, his mind racing. He hadn't dealt with another human being up close in so long, let alone someone in distress. But old instincts kicked in, survival skills learned long ago on the road. He needed to get her warm, and fast. The wet coat had to go. Sam's hands hesitated at the buttons, his face flushing. "Sorry about this, ma'am," he muttered, carefully removing the soaked garment. Underneath, she wore a sweater and jeans, also damp from the snow. Bear brought over another blanket in his mouth, surprising Sam with his initiative. "Good boy," he said softly, taking the offering and adding it to the first. The dog settled at the poor woman's feet, providing additional warmth. Sam built up the fire in the stove, adding several logs until the metal sides glowed red-hot. The woman's color was better already, her breathing deeper and more regular. Still, he knew she needed more than just external warmth. In the kitchen area, he put water on to boil, then rummaged through his supplies until he found the hot chocolate mix he kept but rarely used. As he worked, he kept glancing at his unexpected guest, still trying to process this sudden disruption of his solitary existence. What was she doing out here in such weather? The nearest town was 20 miles away, and there were no other houses for miles around. His cabin wasn't even on most maps. The water boiled, and Sam prepared the hot chocolate, adding an extra spoonful of mix. As he approached the chair with the steaming mug, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She stared at him, confusion and fear flickering across her face. "You're safe," Sam said quickly, keeping his distance to avoid frightening her further. "You collapsed at my door. The storm—" He gestured towards the windows, where snow now fell in thick curtains. She tried to sit up straighter, wincing. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice hoarse. "My car. The road." "Don't try to talk yet," Sam interrupted, holding out the mug. "Drink this first. It'll help warm you from the inside." She looked at the offered drink, then at his face, studying him. Sam knew what she saw. A big man with graying hair and a beard, wearing worn jeans and a flannel shirt, his arms covered in faded tattoos. Not exactly a comforting sight for a woman alone in the wilderness. But something in her eyes shifted, and she reached for the mug with trembling hands. Bear chose that moment to lift his head and give her fingers a gentle lick, drawing a startled laugh from her. "That's Bear," Sam said, stepping back to give her space. "He's already decided you're okay, and he's a better judge of character than most people I know." She took a careful sip of the hot chocolate, color returning to her cheeks. "Thank you," she said, her voice stronger. "Both of you. I thought, when I saw the light through the trees, I wasn't sure I'd make it." Sam pulled a wooden chair from the kitchen table and sat, maintaining a respectful distance. "What brought you up here in weather like this?" She cradled the mug in both hands, soaking in its warmth. "I was heading to Cherokee for a job interview. The GPS took me on what it said was a shortcut through the mountains. Then the snow started, and I lost control on a curve." She shuddered. "The car's stuck in a ditch about a mile back. I tried to stay with it, but it was getting so cold." Sam nodded. He knew the curve she meant. It had claimed more than one vehicle over the years. "You did the right thing, looking for shelter. That storm's only getting worse." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "You can stay here until it passes. The couch folds out into a bed, and I've got plenty of supplies." The offer surprised him as much as it seemed to surprise her. After 5 years of zealously guarding his solitude, here he was inviting a stranger to stay. But what choice did he have? The storm was deadly now, and he couldn't send her back into it. "I don't want to impose," she started, but another gust of wind rattled the windows, making her jump. "It's not an imposition," Sam said firmly. "It wouldn't be right to send you back out there. Besides," he added, nodding toward Bear, who had rested his chin on her knee, "I don't think my dog would let you leave anyway." A small smile touched her lips as she scratched behind Bear's ears. "Well, I can't argue with that." She straightened slightly, some of her composure returning. "I'm Naomi, by the way. Naomi Watson." "Sam Hensley," he replied, omitting his old road name. That part of his life had no place here. "Once you're warmed up, I'll fix you something to eat. Then we can see about getting your car out when the storm passes." Naomi nodded, taking another sip of hot chocolate. The fear had faded from her eyes, replaced by something like wonder as she glanced around the cabin. "Did you build all this?" "Yes, ma'am," Sam said, surprising himself with a touch of pride in his voice. "Took 2 summers, but every piece is handcrafted." "It's beautiful," she said softly, "like something out of a story." Sam looked around his cabin, seeing it suddenly through new eyes, the solid logs carefully fitted together, the handmade furniture, the warm glow of kerosene lamps on polished wood. For the first time in years, he felt a flicker of something other than guilt or regret. Bear sighed contentedly at Naomi's feet, his tail thumping against the floor. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, something had shifted. The silence that had been Sam's constant companion for so long was broken, and surprisingly, he found he didn't mind. Sam moved quickly, catching Naomi's slight frame before she could crumple to the wooden floor. Her red coat was ice-cold and wet from the snow, her skin like frozen marble beneath his calloused hands. Without hesitation, he scooped her up, surprised by how light she felt in his arms. "Bear, move," he commanded gruffly, and his faithful companion shifted away from his favorite spot by the crackling fireplace. Sam gently lowered Naomi into the weathered armchair closest to the flames, its worn leather warmed by the fire's glow. "Thank you," she whispered, her teeth chattering. "I'm Naomi. Naomi Fields." Sam nodded, already striding toward the wooden chest where he kept his spare blankets. He pulled out his thickest wool throw, the one his grandmother had made years ago, its forest green pattern still vibrant despite its age. Returning to Naomi, he draped it carefully around her shoulders. "Need to get you warm," he said, his voice rough from disuse. "I'll make some tea." In the small kitchen area, Sam filled his copper kettle with water and set it on the wood stove. His hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, but his mind was elsewhere. It had been so long since he'd had a visitor, let alone a woman in his cabin. The solitude of the past 5 years stretched behind him like a vast, empty road. The kettle's whistle broke through his thoughts. He prepared the tea in his best mug, the one without any chips, and added a generous spoonful of honey. When he turned back to Naomi, he found her watching the fire with tired eyes, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. "Here," he said, offering the steaming mug. "Careful, it's hot." Her fingers brushed his as she took the cup, and Sam noticed how delicate they were, despite their trembling. "Thank you, Mr. Hensley. Sam Hensley." He settled into the chair opposite her, keeping a respectful distance. Bear padded over and laid his head on Naomi's knee, earning a small smile from her. "I was trying to reach my friend Sarah's cabin," Naomi explained between sips of tea. "She's up near Cherokee. I thought I could make it before the storm got too bad, but—" She shook her head, and Sam noticed how the firelight caught the subtle bronze highlights in her dark hair. "Road gets treacherous up here, especially in weather like this," Sam said, his eyes drawn to the window where snow whirled past in white sheets. The wind howled through the trees, a sound he usually found comforting in his solitude but now seemed ominous. Hours crept by as the storm raged outside. Sam added logs to the fire, made more tea, and tried not to hover. Naomi's shivering gradually subsided, but the weather showed no signs of improving. The radio crackled with warnings of whiteout conditions and record snowfall. As darkness settled over the mountain, Sam faced an uncomfortable reality. "Storm sealed us in," he said finally, breaking a long silence. "Roads won't be passable until morning at least." Naomi nodded, resignation clear in her expression. "I was afraid of that." She straightened in her chair, drawing the blanket closer. "I don't want to impose any more than I already have, but—" "Got a spare bed," Sam cut in, already moving towards the hallway. "It's nothing fancy, but it's warm." "Oh no, please," Naomi protested, rising from her chair. "The couch will be fine. You've already done so much." Sam paused, studying her face in the firelight. There was something about her presence that made his usually comfortable cabin feel different, warmer somehow, despite the storm raging outside. But there was also an unfamiliar tension in the air, like the charge before lightning strikes. "Take the bed," he insisted. "I sleep out here most nights anyway." It wasn't entirely true, but the lie felt kind. After some more gentle protest from Naomi, Sam showed her to the small bedroom. He provided extra blankets, a towel, and one of his clean flannel shirts she could use as a nightgown. Then he retreated to the main room, settling onto the couch, with Bear at his feet. The cabin creaked and moaned under the storm's assault. Sam stared at the ceiling, hyper-aware of the soft sounds coming from the bedroom, the rustle of blankets, the quiet pad of feet, the gentle click of the door. It had been so long since he'd shared his space with another person that even these small noises seemed to fill the cabin. Bear whined softly and pressed closer to the couch. Sam reached down to scratch behind his ears, grateful for the familiar comfort of his dog's presence. The fire popped and hissed, casting dancing shadows on the walls. Through it all, Sam could hear Naomi's breathing from the other room, soft and rhythmic, but not yet settled into sleep. He lay there, watching the flames dance and trying not to think about the stranger in his bed. She carried herself with a quiet dignity that intrigued him, despite his best efforts to maintain emotional distance. There was something in her eyes, a depth of experience that didn't match her gentle demeanor, that called to the broken places in his own soul. The wind screamed past the windows like lost spirits seeking shelter, but inside the cabin, two lonely hearts beat in the darkness, each aware of the other's presence, each wondering what the morning would bring. Sam pulled his blanket tighter, and closed his eyes, though he knew sleep would be long in coming. Bear's tail thumped softly against the floor, a steady rhythm in the storm-tossed night. Hours passed, marked only by the gradual settling of logs in the fireplace and the endless howl of the wind. Sam remained awake, his warrior's instincts still sharp despite years of peaceful mountain living. He listened to the storm, to Bear's gentle snoring, and to the occasional soft sounds from the bedroom that told him Naomi was also finding sleep elusive. The fire's glow filled the cabin with amber light and shifting shadows, a warm counterpoint to the fury of the storm outside. In all his years of solitude, Sam had never felt the emptiness of his cabin quite so keenly as he did now, knowing another soul lay awake just a few yards away, separated by a wooden wall and years of carefully constructed emotional barriers. Morning arrived like a whisper. The world outside transformed into a pristine blanket of white. The storm had passed during the night, leaving behind a landscape so bright it hurt the eyes. Sunlight filtered through frost-covered windows, casting diamond-like sparkles across the cabin's wooden floors. Sam rose early, as was his habit, moving quietly through his morning routine. Bear followed at his heels as he stoked the dying embers and added fresh logs to the fireplace. The familiar tasks felt different somehow, knowing another person slept just down the hall. He found himself trying to minimize the usual creaks and groans of the old floorboards. In the kitchen, Sam pulled out his cast-iron skillet and set to work making breakfast. He didn't have much in the way of fresh supplies, but he could manage decent biscuits from stored flour, and he always kept a good supply of venison jerky. The familiar smell of baking filled the cabin, and Sam caught himself wondering what Naomi would think of his simple fare. The bedroom door opened just as he was pulling the biscuits from the oven. Naomi emerged, wrapped in the borrowed flannel shirt that hung nearly to her knees. Her hair was slightly tousled from sleep, but her eyes were clear and alert. "Good morning," she said softly, and something in Sam's chest tightened at the gentle warmth in her voice. "Morning," he managed, gesturing towards the small table. "Breakfast is about ready." Naomi settled into one of the wooden chairs, her movements graceful despite her makeshift attire. Sam placed a plate before her, loaded with warm biscuits and strips of jerky, then took his own seat across the table. Before he could begin eating, Naomi bowed her head, closed her eyes, and began to pray. "Dear Heavenly Father," her voice was quiet but clear, "thank you for this new day, for warmth and unexpected kindness. Bless this food and the hands that prepared it. In Jesus' name, amen." Sam sat frozen, fork halfway to his mouth. The simple prayer hit him like a physical blow. He couldn't remember the last time anyone had prayed in his presence. It must have been decades ago, before everything went wrong, before prison, before the choices that had marked him forever. The thought that God might care about blessing food he had prepared seemed almost laughable. Naomi opened her eyes and began eating, seemingly unaware of Sam's internal turmoil. "These biscuits are wonderful," she said after a few bites. "You must cook often." Sam shrugged, forcing himself to focus on his food. "Had to learn. Nobody else up here to do it." A comfortable silence fell between them as they ate. Through the window, Sam could see fresh snow still falling, though much lighter now. The morning light caught each flake, turning them into tiny falling stars. "I've been traveling for a while now," Naomi said suddenly, her eyes fixed on her plate. "Looking for a fresh start, I suppose." There was something in her voice, a weight, a sorrow, that made Sam look up sharply. He recognized that tone. It was the sound of someone carrying a heavy burden. "Lot of that going around," he responded carefully, not wanting to pry but feeling an unexpected urge to understand. After breakfast, Naomi insisted on helping with the cleanup. Before Sam could protest, She had gathered the dishes and was running hot water in the sink. "Please," she said when he tried to stop her, "let me do something to repay your kindness." Throughout the morning, Naomi moved through the cabin with quiet efficiency, straightening things here and there. Sam found himself watching her as he went about his own tasks, fascinated by how naturally she seemed to fit into the space. She folded the blankets she'd used, straightened the cushions on the couch, and even organized the scattered books on his shelf. Then she began to hum. The sound was so unexpected that Sam nearly dropped the firewood he was carrying. It was an old hymn, one he vaguely remembered from childhood church services. Amazing Grace, maybe, or something similar. The melody filled the cabin, soft and sweet, weaving between the crackle of the fire and the whisper of wind outside. Sam stood completely still, listening. Music hadn't filled these walls since before prison. The simple tune seemed to unlock something in his chest, a feeling he couldn't quite name. As evening approached, Naomi paused in her tidying to stand by the window, watching the sun set behind the snow-covered mountains. "I need to thank you again," she said, turning to face Sam. "You saved my life last night. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't opened your door." Sam shifted uncomfortably under her grateful gaze. "Anybody would have done the same." "No," she said softly, shaking her head. "Not everybody would." She hesitated before asking, "You live up here all alone?" The question hung in the air between them. Sam could feel Bear pressing against his leg, a warm, solid presence grounding him in the moment. He looked at Naomi, seeing the genuine curiosity in her eyes, and felt the familiar weight of his past pressing down on him. "Yeah," he finally answered, his voice rough. "People don't come looking for monsters." The words fell into the quiet cabin like stones into still water, creating ripples of tension in the peaceful atmosphere they'd maintained throughout the day. Naomi's expression showed no fear, only a deep, considering look that made Sam want to turn away. Instead, he held her gaze, waiting for the judgment he was sure would come. Outside, the blizzard intensified, wrapping the cabin in a thick blanket of white. The wind whistled through the trees, creating an eerie melody that seemed to isolate them further from the world below. Sam added another log to the fireplace, watching as sparks danced upward into the chimney. Naomi sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. The firelight cast a warm glow on her face, softening her features. Bear had taken a liking to her, sprawled contentedly at her feet. "Looks like we might be stuck here another day," Sam said, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. "Road'll be impassable until this lets up." Naomi nodded, seemingly unbothered by the news. "I suppose God has his reasons for keeping me here a while longer." She smiled slightly, running her fingers through Bear's fur. Sam settled into his worn armchair, trying to ignore how natural she looked in his space. The quiet between them felt tender but cautious, like a wild animal that might startle at any sudden movement. "Would you mind if I told you a bit about myself?" Naomi asked suddenly, her voice gentle. "I feel like I should explain why I'm really out, here, running toward something new." Sam gestured for her to continue, his curiosity piqued despite himself. "I grew up in the church," she began, her eyes fixed on the dancing flames. "It was my whole world. My daddy was a deacon, Mama led the women's ministry. By the time I was 16, I was leading the youth choir." A soft smile played across her lips at the memory. "Music was my way of connecting with God, of expressing my faith. I loved watching the younger kids find their voices, seeing their faces light up when they got a difficult harmony just right." She paused, taking a sip of tea. The church was family, you know? Or at least, I thought it was. Sam watched her face carefully, noting how her expression shifted subtly as she continued. I made a choice early on to remain pure, to wait for marriage, for someone who would value my soul as much as my body. She glanced at Sam, as if checking for judgment, but found only quiet attention. People respected that decision, or seemed to, until I got older. Then it became whispers, concerned looks, questions about why I was being so particular. Sam expected to feel mockery rise in him at her words. Such innocence seemed almost naive in his world of violence and regret. Instead, he felt a surprising admiration for her conviction, her quiet strength in holding to her beliefs. "And you?" Naomi asked, her tone lightening slightly. "What kind of woman caught the heart of a mountain man like you?" The question hung in the air between them. Sam shifted in his chair, his hands gripping the armrests. After a long moment he spoke, his voice rough with honesty. "Never been with anyone," he admitted quietly. "Not like that." Naomi's eyes widened in surprise. "But I thought, with the motorcycle club and everything?" Sam shook his head, a bitter smile touching his lips. "Oh, there was plenty of sin in my past. Violence, theft, worse things. But that..." He gestured vaguely. "Intimacy. It always seemed like something sacred, something I didn't want to defile with who I was back then." Understanding dawned in Naomi's eyes as she looked at him, really looked at him. The tattoos that covered his arms, visible beneath his rolled-up sleeves, told stories of his past. But now she saw beyond them to the man underneath, someone who had preserved a kind of innocence despite his rough exterior. The fire crackled between them, throwing shadows on the walls. Outside, the wind had begun to die down, leaving an almost peaceful silence in its wake. They sat together, neither speaking, as something fragile and unnamed began to form in the space between them. Suddenly, a distant sound broke through the quiet, the labored rumble of an engine struggling up the mountain road. Naomi's body tensed immediately, her eyes darting to the window, though nothing could be seen through the swirling snow. The sound grew fainter and eventually disappeared, but Sam noticed how her hands trembled, slightly as she set down her mug. "Probably someone else caught in the storm," he offered, trying to ease the sudden tension in her posture. But something in the way she stared into the fire, her shoulders rigid, told him there was more to her reaction than simple startlement. Bear sensed the shift in mood and pressed closer to Naomi's side, offering silent comfort. She absently stroked his head, but her mind seemed far away, perhaps back wherever she had run from. The evening stretched on, neither of them mentioning the vehicle or Naomi's reaction to it. Instead, they let the fire's warmth wrap around them like a protective cocoon, each lost in their own thoughts, while finding strange comfort in the other's presence. Morning arrived with an eerie stillness, the storm's fury spent at last. Sunlight sparkled off pristine snowdrifts that transformed Sam's mountain into a blinding white expanse. The snow had piled high against the cabin walls, reaching halfway up the windows in places. Sam pulled on his heavy boots and thick winter coat, giving Bear a pat as the dog eagerly bounded toward the door. "Stay here," he told Naomi, who stood wrapped in a blanket by the wood stove. "Need to check for any damage first." The cold hit him like a physical blow as he stepped outside. His breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air while he trudged through knee-deep snow around the cabin's perimeter. The roof had held strong, and the shutters remained secure where he'd battened them down. But something made the hair on his neck stand up. Tracks in the snow, fresh tire marks leading uncomfortably close to his property before turning around. Bear growled softly, nose pointed toward the road. Sam studied the tracks more carefully. They weren't from a local vehicle. The tread pattern was wrong for the trucks and four-wheelers his few neighbors drove. Someone had come searching in the middle of a blizzard. When he returned inside, snow crusting his boots, Naomi was at the stove heating water for coffee. The domestic scene struck him as oddly natural, as if she belonged there in his kitchen. But when he mentioned the tire tracks, her composed expression cracked. Fear flashed across her face before she could hide it behind a careful mask. "Sit," Sam said gruffly, pulling out a chair. "Think it's time you told me what's really going on?" Naomi's hands trembled as she poured their coffee. She wrapped her fingers around the steaming mug, drawing strength from its warmth. "His name is Deacon Harris," she began quietly. "He's an elder at my church, respected, influential. Everyone trusts him." Sam waited silently as she gathered her thoughts. At first his attention seemed fatherly. He'd lost his wife years ago, never remarried. He took special interest in my work with the youth choir, always praising my dedication to the church. Her voice grew tight. But then the gifts started coming. Expensive ones. He'd show up at my workplace, my apartment, always, with some excuse about church business. She took a shaky sip of coffee. When I tried to create distance, he turned different. Started talking about divine intervention, how God had shown him I was meant to be his wife. Said my purity was a sign. Her fingers whitened around the mug. The night I finally told him no, told him to leave me alone, he grabbed me, said I was being led astray by pride, that he'd save my soul whether I wanted it or not. Anger rolled through Sam's chest, dark and familiar. "Did he hurt you?" "No, someone walked by and he let go, but his eyes..." She shuddered. "I'd never seen such rage. He started spreading rumors in the church, saying I'd led him on, that I was secretly meeting men. When people I'd known my whole life began looking at me sideways, believing him over me, I knew I had to leave." Sam stood abruptly, his chair scraping the floor. He paced the small kitchen, working to contain the violence building in his blood. After a moment, he stopped at the window, staring out at the pristine snow. "You're safe here," he said finally, his voice rough with conviction. "No one's going to hurt you on my mountain." Naomi gave him a sad smile. "The road will be clear soon. I can't hide forever." They spent the day in companionable silence, each absorbed in necessary tasks. Sam attacked the woodpile with particular vigor, splitting logs until sweat froze on his forehead despite the cold. Inside, Naomi worked magic with his simple pantry supplies, the smell of hearty stew filling the cabin. As evening approached, Sam showed her how to secure the heavy wooden shutters, teaching her which bolts needed checking and how to brace them against wind. She was an attentive student, her small hands sure on the metal fasteners. "Better to know how to protect yourself," he said gruffly. When darkness fell, Naomi insisted they pray before sleeping. Sam found himself awkwardly kneeling beside her near the fireplace, Bear watching curiously from his bed. "Dear Lord," she began, her voice trembling slightly. "Thank you for this shelter, for Sam's protection and kindness. Please keep us safe through the night. Guard us from those who mean harm. Give us strength and wisdom for whatever tomorrow brings." Sam kept his eyes open, watching firelight play across her face. Her simple faith touched something long buried in him, a belief in goodness he'd thought lost forever. Her soft "Amen" seemed to echo in the quiet cabin, and he found himself whispering it back. As they rose, Naomi squeezed his hand briefly. "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything." Sam nodded, unable to speak past the tightness in his throat. He watched her settle onto the couch with her blanket before retreating to his own room. Sleep was long in coming as he listened to the settling house, every creak making him tense until exhaustion finally pulled him under. The morning sun painted the snow-covered mountain in shades of gold, its rays filtering through frost-laced windows. Inside Sam's cabin, warmth and the aroma of breakfast filled the air. Naomi stood at the old stove, her movements graceful as she stirred a pot of grits and tended to eggs sizzling in the cast-iron skillet. Her voice, soft and melodic, floated through the cabin as she sang an old hymn. "Amazing grace, how sweet the sound." The words drifted up the stairs, gently pulling Sam from his sleep. He lay still for a moment, letting the unfamiliar comfort wash over him. The sound of someone else moving about his space, cooking and singing. It stirred something deep in his chest, an ache he hadn't known was there. Bear's tail thumped against the floor as Sam made his way downstairs. The dog had already claimed his spot near Naomi's feet, clearly won over by the occasional morsel she slipped him. "Good morning," she said, offering him a warm smile. "I hope you don't mind. I wanted to thank you properly for everything." Sam shook his head, watching as she moved confidently around his kitchen. "Been a long time since anyone cooked in here," he admitted, his voice still rough with sleep. "Well, sit down. These grits are just about ready." She spooned the creamy mixture into bowls, adding a pat of butter that melted slowly into golden pools. The eggs followed, perfectly cooked, their edges slightly crispy the way he liked them. They ate in comfortable silence, broken only by Bear's hopeful whines. The morning light streamed through the windows, catching the steam rising from their coffee cups. Sam couldn't remember the last time his cabin had felt so alive. After breakfast, Sam headed out to check the generator. The snow had drifted against it, and he wanted to make sure it was running properly. To his surprise, Naomi followed him out, wrapped in one of his old coats that hung nearly to her knees. "Show me how it works," she said, her breath visible in the cold air. "I should know these things." Sam found himself explaining the basics of generator maintenance, impressed by her quick understanding and practical questions. When he mentioned the importance of being prepared for emergencies, her expression grew serious. "Speaking of being prepared," he hesitated, then continued, "think it's time you learned to handle a rifle." Naomi's eyes widened. I don't know if I could." "Ain't about wanting to," Sam said gently. "It's about being able to if you need to. Got coyotes up here, sometimes worse things." He brought out his old .22 rifle, showing her how to hold it properly. Her hands trembled at first, but she listened intently as he explained the safety mechanisms and proper stance. They set up some cans on a fallen log, and Sam stood behind her, adjusting her grip. "Breathe slow," he instructed. "Squeeze the trigger, don't pull." The first shot went wide, making her jump, but by the fifth try she was hitting the cans more often than not. Sam felt a surge of pride at her determination. "Good," he said. "Real good." As the day wore on, they fell into an easy rhythm. Naomi moved through the cabin, bringing order to spaces Sam hadn't thought needed it. She hummed as she worked, and somehow the sound made the place feel warmer. Sam found himself talking more than he had in years, answering her questions about his woodworking tools, explaining how he'd built the cabin. Laughter crept into their conversations, genuine laughter that surprised them both. When Naomi accidentally scared herself with her reflection in a window she was cleaning, her startled yelp and subsequent giggling had Sam chuckling despite himself. As evening approached, Naomi discovered Sam in his workshop, carefully carving details into a piece of pine. She watched him work for a moment, admiring the sure movement of his hands. "Could we make something together?" she asked softly. Sam looked up, questioning. "A cross," she suggested. For hope. He studied her face, seeing the gentle certainty there. After a moment, he nodded slowly. Got some cedar that might work nice. They worked side by side, Sam guiding her hands as she learned to use the carving tools. The wood took shape beneath their combined efforts, smooth and graceful. The scent of cedar filled the workshop, mixing with the crisp winter air coming through the door. In the quiet focus of their work, Sam felt something he'd never experienced before, a peace that seemed to settle into his very bones. The simple act of creating something beautiful alongside someone who asked nothing of him but his presence, it filled an emptiness he hadn't known how to name. "Thank you," Naomi said softly as they finished, her fingers tracing the smooth wood. "For being kind." Sam ducked his head, embarrassed by the gratitude in her voice. "You make it easy," he muttered. They were cleaning up the wood shavings, the new cross sitting proudly on the workbench, when they heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of tires crunching through snow. Someone was making their way up the mountain road. The sound grew louder, echoing in the stillness of the winter evening. Sam watched as the peace drained from Naomi's face, replaced by a tension that made his hands curl into fists. Bear raised his head, ears pricked towards the sound. They stood frozen in the workshop, listening as the vehicle drew closer to the cabin. The golden peace of their day shattered like ice in a spring thaw, leaving only the cold reality of whatever was coming up that mountain road. The vehicle sounds eventually faded into the distance, but the tension remained thick in the cabin air. Sam methodically checked all the windows and doors, drawing the heavy curtains tight against the gathering dark. Naomi stood in the middle of the living room, arms wrapped around herself, her earlier peace shattered. "No lights tonight," Sam said softly, lighting only a few candles near the fireplace. "Better if folks think no one's home." Naomi nodded, sinking down onto the couch. In the flickering candlelight, her face looked drawn, shadows dancing beneath her eyes. Bear settled at her feet, his solid presence offering what comfort he could. "I can't stop shaking," she whispered, her hands trembling as she pulled a blanket around her shoulders. Sam added another log to the fire, watching the sparks rise. "Ain't nobody gonna hurt you while I'm breathing," he said, his voice low and firm. "That's a promise." He settled into the chair across from her, the firelight catching the faded tattoos on his arms. For a long moment, there was only the sound of crackling wood and wind. Then Sam began to speak, his voice rough with memories. "I was 17 when I joined the Hells Angels," he said, staring into the flames. "Young, angry, thought I was bulletproof." He glanced at Naomi, expecting to see fear or judgment, but found only quiet attention. "My old man was a drunk. Mama long gone. Gang became my family. Thought I'd found somewhere I belonged." He traced a pattern on the arm of his chair. "Started with small stuff, running drugs, intimidation. But violence, it grows in you, like a poison." Naomi pulled her knees up to her chest, listening. The firelight softened her features, creating a space that felt sacred, like confession. "Did things I ain't proud of, things that wake me up sweating some nights." Sam's voice grew hoarse. "Got caught up in a bad deal, drugs and blood money. 3 men died. I didn't pull the trigger, but their faces, they stay with you." He described the years in prison, 10 long winters of concrete and steel. "Found the Bible there," he admitted. "Read it cover to cover 12 times. Not sure I believed, but something in those words. They wouldn't let me go." The wind howled outside, rattling the windows. "When I got out, knew I couldn't go back to that life. Couldn't trust myself around the temptation. So I vanished. Found these mountains. Built this place with my own hands. Thought maybe if I stayed alone, I couldn't hurt nobody else. Naomi uncurled slightly, her eyes soft in the firelight. Maybe you didn't hide, she said gently. Maybe you were waiting to heal. The words hit Sam like a physical force. He looked at her, this woman who'd stumbled into his life 3 days ago, and felt something crack open in his chest. She saw through his carefully constructed walls with such simple grace. God doesn't waste anything, she continued softly. Not even our pain. Sometimes the longest roads lead us exactly where we need to be. Sam felt moisture gathering in his eyes and blinked hard. He hadn't cried since he was 12 years old, and he wasn't about to start now. But something in him felt lighter, as if sharing the weight of his past had loosened its hold. They sat in comfortable silence as the fire burned lower. Naomi's eyes began to grow heavy, her head nodding slightly. Sam watched as she curled up on the couch, Bear snoring softly at her feet. When her breathing evened out, into sleep, Sam found himself doing something he hadn't done in 20 years. His lips moved silently, forming words he'd almost forgotten. God, if you're listening, if you're even there. He paused, uncertain. Just keep her safe, please. He wasn't sure if anyone was listening, but speaking the words felt right somehow, like unlocking a door long rusted shut. The night passed quietly, no more vehicles disturbing the mountain silence. Sam dozed in his chair, waking at every small sound, his protective instincts on high alert. Dawn brought fresh snowfall, thick and silent. When Sam checked outside, the tire tracks from the previous day had vanished, covered by nature's clean slate. The morning sun turned the snow-covered landscape into a glittering wonderland, peaceful and unthreatening. After breakfast, Sam decided it was time to look at Naomi's car. It had been sitting in the snow since she'd arrived, and he knew she'd need it working when she decided to leave. The thought brought an unexpected ache to his chest. They trudged through the snow together, Naomi wrapped in his spare coat again, Bear bounding ahead of them. The car sat like a snow-covered lump at the edge of the clearing. Sam popped the hood, his experienced hands checking the engine. Looks like your timing belt's shot, he explained. Got some parts that might work in the shed. Naomi watched him work, her arms wrapped around herself against more than just the cold. I don't want to leave, she admitted quietly. This is the first place I've felt safe in months. Sam's hands stilled on the engine. He wanted to tell her she could stay, that having her here made his solitary existence feel like living instead of just surviving. But he knew the mountain wasn't safe, not with someone searching for her. Instead, he focused on replacing the worn belt, his movements careful and precise. The morning stretched on as he worked, Naomi asking questions about the engine, trying to learn. But beneath her curiosity, Sam could see the fear in her eyes. Fear of returning to a world where danger wore a respectable face and hid behind church walls. As he closed the hood, the engine purring smoothly now, Sam felt torn between pride in his work and a deep reluctance to see it finished. The car was ready, but neither of them seemed prepared for what that meant. The days following Sam's confession brought an unexpected calm to the mountain cabin. The repaired car sat ready in the yard, but neither Sam nor Naomi mentioned her departure. Instead, they fell into a comfortable routine, sharing meals and quiet conversations that felt as natural as breathing. One crisp morning, Sam looked through their dwindling supplies and said gruffly, "Need to make a town run. You want to come along?" Naomi's face brightened. "I'd like that. Been cooped up here so long I almost forgot what other people look like." Sam's lips twitched. "Ain't missing much down there." They bundled up against the cold. Naomi wearing one of Sam's old flannel shirts over her sweater. Bear watched forlornly as they climbed into Sam's weathered pickup truck, but stayed behind to guard the cabin. The mountain road wound down through snow-laden pines, their branches heavy with white. Naomi pressed her face to the window, taking in the winter wonderland. "It's like a Christmas card," she breathed, her words forming little clouds on the glass. Sam glanced at her childlike wonder and felt something warm unfurl in his chest. He'd gotten so used to the mountain's beauty, he'd forgotten how to see it through fresh eyes. The small town of Pine Ridge sprawled below them, a collection of weathered buildings and pickup trucks. As they parked outside the general store, Sam noticed how Naomi straightened her shoulders, preparing herself. Inside, the usual Saturday morning crowd paused their conversations to stare. Sam was used to it. The townfolk had never quite gotten comfortable with the ex-biker hermit in their midst. But today, their curious gazes fixed on Naomi, wondering what kind of woman would be riding with Sam Hensley. "Just ignore them," Sam muttered, grabbing a shopping basket. Naomi smiled and nodded politely at the onlookers, her natural grace making their rudeness seem small. She moved through the aisles with purpose, selecting ingredients Sam had never thought to buy: fresh vegetables, spices, even a bag of chocolate chips. "Gonna make you proper cookies," she said, adding them to the basket. "Not those store-bought ones you've been eating." Old Mrs. Peterson at the register kept shooting them suspicious looks as she rang up their items. Sam could almost hear the gossip that would spread through town. The mountain monster had found himself a woman, but his fierce reputation served its purpose. No one dared approach or ask questions. They paid and loaded the supplies into the truck in peaceful silence. On the drive back, the late afternoon sun painted the snow-covered landscape in shades of pink and gold. As they rounded a bend, Naomi pointed to a frozen creek glittering in the light. "Can we stop for a minute?" she asked. "It's so beautiful." Sam pulled over, killing the engine. They climbed down to the creek bank, their boots crunching in the fresh snow. The water beneath the ice moved silently, creating patterns like delicate lace. Naomi wandered a few steps ahead, her red coat bright against the white landscape. Without warning, she scooped up a handful of snow, packed it tight, and threw it at Sam's chest. The snowball exploded against his jacket. Sam stood there, shocked, as Naomi's laughter rang out across the creek. It was the most beautiful sound he'd ever heard. A grin spread across his face, the first real smile in years. He bent down, gathered his own snowball, and launched it back. Naomi squealed and ducked, but not fast enough. For the next hour, they forgot everything else. They were just two people playing in the snow like children, their laughter echoing off the mountains. Sam couldn't remember the last time he'd felt so light, so free. Finally, breathless and covered in snow, they leaned against the truck watching the sun sink behind the peaks. The moment felt perfect, almost sacred. "Thank you," Naomi said softly. "For what?" "For making me feel safe enough to laugh again." The drive back to the cabin was quiet but comfortable. As they unpacked the supplies, Naomi moved around the kitchen with familiar ease, putting things away as if she'd always belonged there. Later, as they sat by the fire drinking hot chocolate, Naomi set down her mug with determination. "Sam, I need to tell you something." He looked up, his heart tightening with worry. "I don't want to live in fear anymore," she said firmly. "I'm tired of running, of looking over my shoulder, of letting him control my life even when he's not here." Sam's hands clenched. "Naomi, I know I can't hide forever, but being here, with you—" She paused, gathering her thoughts. "For the first time in so long, I feel like myself again, like I can breathe." Sam studied her face in the firelight, seeing the strength beneath her gentle exterior. "You can stay," he said quietly. "Long as you need. Long as you want." Tears shimmered in her eyes, but she smiled. "The cross we've been working on, can we finish it tonight?" Sam nodded, retrieving the cedar cross they'd been carving together. They worked side by side, his rough hands and her smooth ones bringing out the beauty in the wood. When it was done, they hung it on the wall above the fireplace. Naomi's fingers traced the grain of the wood. "It's perfect," she whispered. Sam watched her, feeling something shift deep in his chest. It wasn't just attraction or protection anymore. It was deeper, sweeter, more terrifying. Hope, maybe. Love, even though he barely remembered what that felt like. They sat together on the couch, the fire crackling softly, Bear snoring at their feet. The moment felt like a gift, like a glimpse of what life could be. Then headlights swept across the cabin walls. The peaceful silence shattered as a truck engine echoed in the distance, growing louder with each second. Bear lifted his head, growling low in his throat. Sam felt Naomi freeze beside him, her hand finding his in the darkness. Sam moved swiftly to the window, his muscles tense. The truck's headlights cut harsh beams through the darkness, illuminating swirling snow. His heart hammered against his ribs as he recognized the black pickup pulling up to his cabin. "Get away from the windows," he whispered to Naomi, pushing her behind him. Bear stood alert, hackles raised. Through the frosted glass, Sam watched as Deacon Harris stepped out of the truck. The man's tall figure cast a long shadow across the snow, and in his right hand gleamed something that made Sam's blood run cold. A pistol. "Naomi!" Harris's voice boomed across the yard, slicing through the mountain. Silence. "I know you're in there! Come out and face what you've done!" Sam felt Naomi trembling behind him. His hand instinctively moved to the old revolver at his hip, a remnant from his past he'd never quite been able to let go. "Stay inside," he murmured to her. "Lock the door behind me." "Sam, please!" Her fingers clutched his sleeve, but he was already moving, stepping onto the porch with measured steps. The cold air bit at his face as he positioned himself squarely in front of the door, blocking any path to Naomi. "This is private property," Sam's voice carried the weight of years of intimidation. "You need to leave, now." Deacon Harris's face twisted with contempt. The man's clothes were expensive, his bearing that of someone used to being obeyed, but there was something unhinged in his eyes. "So this is where you've been hiding," Harris spat, his words directed past Sam. "Living in sin with this mountain devil? You're even more corrupt than I thought." Sam's fingers twitched near his revolver. "Last warning, get off my land." "Or what?" Harris's laugh was ugly. "You'll add more blood to your hands? Everyone knows what you are, Hensley. A killer, a sinner." He raised the gun, pointing it at Sam's chest. "You think you can steal what's mine?" The old familiar rush of violence surged through Sam's veins. How easy it would be to draw, to end this threat to Naomi's peace. His hand moved toward his weapon. "Sam, no!" Naomi's voice cut through the tension like a shaft of light. She had opened the door, though she stayed behind him. "Please," she called out, her voice steady despite her fear. "Don't let this end in violence. Not here. Not now." Sam's hand froze on his revolver. The weight of her words pressed against his conscience, reminding him of all the times violence had solved nothing. Harris's face contorted with rage. "Still playing the saint, Naomi? Acting so pure while you tempt men to destruction? You ruined everything. My reputation, my ministry." "You did that yourself," Naomi replied softly. "With your lies and your twisted version of love." "Filth!" Harris shouted, his gun hand shaking. Living here with this animal. You're nothing but a whore hiding behind false virtue." Sam took a menacing step forward, but Naomi's hand on his back stopped him. The touch was gentle but firm, a reminder of what really mattered. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind through the trees and Harris's heavy breathing. The man's finger tightened on the trigger, and Sam prepared to move. But something in the tableau, Sam's steady stance, Naomi's quiet strength, perhaps even Bear's threatening growl, seemed to penetrate Harris's rage. His hand lowered slightly. "This isn't over," he snarled, backing toward his truck. "You can't hide up here forever, either of you." They watched as he climbed into his vehicle, spinning the tires in the snow as he turned around. The truck's taillights disappeared into the darkness, leaving them in the quiet of the mountain night. Sam didn't move until the engine sound had completely faded. Then he turned to Naomi, who stood pale but composed in the doorway. "Inside," he said gently. "We've got work to do." For the next several hours, Sam moved through the cabin with grim purpose. He pulled boards from his workshop and secured them over every window, checking and double-checking the fastenings. Naomi helped silently, holding the boards steady as he hammered, passing him nails, her prayers a constant whisper under her breath. The fire had burned low by the time he finished, casting long shadows on the walls. The cabin felt darker, more enclosed with the windows boarded, but safer. Sam checked his revolver one last time before settling into the chair facing the door, prepared for a long night of watching. Naomi knelt by the hearth, adding another log to the dying embers. The firelight caught the tears on her cheeks, but her prayers never ceased. Sam listened to the quiet murmur of her voice asking for protection, for peace, for wisdom. Her faith, even now, stirred something deep in his soul. Bear lay alert at Sam's feet, ears pricked toward the door. Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the promise of another storm. Sam knew Harris would return. Men like that always did. But for now, in this moment, they were safe. He watched Naomi's silhouette against the fading firelight, her head bowed in prayer, and made his own silent vow. No matter what came next, he would protect her. Not with violence, she had shown him a better way, but with the same quiet strength she demonstrated every day. The night stretched ahead, long and dark, but they would face it together. The first light of dawn crept over the mountains, painting the snow-covered ground in pale gold. Sam pulled on his heavy coat and stepped outside to check the perimeter, his boots crunching in the fresh snow. The air was crisp and still, carrying the sharp scent of winter. Then he smelled it. Smoke. Not the comforting wood smoke from his chimney, but something chemical and wrong. He rounded the corner of the shed, and his heart stopped. His old truck was engulfed in flames, orange tongues licking at the metal frame. "Naomi!" he shouted, already running toward the burning vehicle. "Bring buckets! Hurry!" She burst from the cabin moments later, carrying 2 large buckets. Together they scooped snow, throwing it desperately at the flames. But the fire was too intense, fed by gasoline and hate. The heat pushed them back as the flames devoured everything: seats, engine, tires. With a groan of tortured metal, the burning crossbeam crashed down. Sam watched helplessly as his only transportation, his connection to the outside world, became a twisted wreck of blackened steel. In the distance, an engine roared. The deacon's truck appeared briefly on the mountain road before disappearing around a bend, leaving only silence and the crackling of dying flames. Beside him, Naomi collapsed to her knees in the snow. "This is all my fault," she sobbed, her shoulders shaking. "Everything I touch turns to ash. I should never have stayed." Sam knelt beside her, gripping her shoulders gently but firmly. "Look at me," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "You gave me a reason to live again. Nothing you bring can be bad." His voice broke as he glanced at the smoldering ruins of his truck, but his grip remained steady. That evening, Sam sat at the kitchen table, staring into nothing. The loss of the truck hit harder than he'd expected. It represented his last tie to the world beyond these mountains, his escape route if things went wrong. Naomi knelt beside his chair and took his calloused hands in hers. Her touch was warm, anchoring. "Pray with me," she whispered. For the first time in decades, Sam bowed his head willingly, as Naomi's soft voice asked not for vengeance, but for the strength to forgive. He found his own lips moving in silent prayer, seeking not revenge, but the power to let go of hatred. The days stretched into a quiet rhythm as Sam and Naomi worked to clear the charred remains of the truck. Each piece of twisted metal they removed felt like lifting a weight from their shoulders. Sam's hands, rough from years of work, sorted through the wreckage, identifying parts that could be salvaged, a handful of tools that survived the flames, boards that could be repurposed. "We can use these," he said, holding up some slightly scorched planks. Naomi nodded, already rolling up her sleeves to help. She refused to leave, despite Sam's gentle suggestions that she might be safer elsewhere. "This is where I need to be," she said firmly, picking up a hammer. Together they worked from sunrise to sunset, rebuilding what was lost. One evening, as golden light filtered through the trees, they gathered cedar wood that had survived the fire. "Let's make something new," Naomi suggested, her eyes bright with purpose. They crafted a cross together, their hands working in harmony. As they worked, words flowed between them like a gentle stream. Sam found himself opening up about things he'd never shared before. "For the first time," he admitted quietly, sanding the cedar's rough edges, "I want more than just survival. Maybe I could help others who are lost, like I was." Naomi's eyes softened. "I dream of creating a safe place," she shared, "for women who've known fear and shame, to show them they're worthy of love." Each evening ended in prayer, their voices mingling in the quiet cabin. Outside, winter's grip began to loosen. The snow melted in patches, revealing tender green shoots beneath. Morning birdsong returned to the mountains, as if nature itself was offering forgiveness and renewal. The mountain air carried the sweet scent of summer as the restored cabin stood proud against the morning sky. In the month since the fire, Sam and Naomi had transformed the place into more than just a home. It had become a beacon of hope for broken souls seeking refuge. 3 days a week, the sound of sawing and hammering filled the workshop as Sam taught carpentry to men fighting their way back from addiction. Their hands, once shaky from withdrawal, grew steady with each piece they crafted. Naomi worked alongside them, her gentle spirit helping wounded women find their strength through creating beautiful things from raw wood. The townspeople who had once crossed the street to avoid Sam now stopped by regularly, asking for his hand-carved crosses. Each piece carried a touch of grace, telling stories of redemption through carefully worked cedar and pine. On this particular morning, Sam ran his calloused hand over the last chapel bench he'd been sanding. The wood felt silk smooth beneath his touch. Naomi appeared beside him, her fingers intertwining with his naturally, like they'd always belonged there. Through the window, sunlight caught the cedar cross they'd built together, hanging above the fireplace. Its warm glow reminded them of their journey, from strangers to soulmates, from broken to whole. They settled at the kitchen table, sharing a quiet breakfast of fresh coffee and homemade biscuits. The valley spread out below them, dotted with wildflowers and new growth. Naomi watched a butterfly dance past the window before turning to Sam. "We were both virgins of the heart," she whispered, her eyes soft with understanding. "Until Grace found us." Sam felt tears well up, but for once he didn't try to hide them. He pulled Naomi into his arms, holding her close as the mountain breeze carried the promise of spring through the open window. Their past pain had transformed into fertile ground where love and faith flourished, growing stronger with each passing day. Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.